This presentation is going to be an introduction to what the Wildfire Mitigators Association is about, and an overview of where we're going, why we're doing it, who's involved to a point, and also we're going to have a presentation by two people out of the insurance industry talking about the risks. And the reason we're doing this association and this initiative is there is a growing wildfire crisis. You're going to see on a graph or two going forward in this presentation that it's not a straight line, but if you take the trend line is up as far as wildfire and the amount of out of control wildfires that are going on. And so the threat is growing, and we think that now is the time. We are looking at a collaborative national vision. I think a lot of visions so far have been sort of provincial oriented or industry oriented. We want to bring all players together that are different from the firefighters to the insurance companies to the railway people. Like we have somebody from CN Rail that's going to chime in and talk to this. We've got deputy fire chief from Banff that'll be on this, municipalities and provinces to all be a part of this as an initiative. Also, innovation and technology is something that is advancing pretty rapidly, but it's not being adapted rapidly. And very slowly would be the word. And we want to be able to enable different stakeholder groups to adopt and utilize better, more useful technology. And the whole idea is how do we speed up the wildfire detection and early prevention as well as a fast response. So the proactive prevention approach is what we're looking for. And if we can do that, that's where we can really make some changes in the sort of the total cost, the efficiency, the performance of all players and all things. And doing this, when we think faster, we'll save a lot more money. My name is Tom Hockett. I am the managing director and board member of the association. I am a business development expert, come out of the cement industry originally, later in the training and development. I ran a company in training and development, Connect for Training. I've been involved with clean tech, helping companies with their growth strategies, and more recently with a technology that early detects wildfire over the last 4 years. So I've really got a sense of understanding what the fire industry is about, from wildfire to fighting even urban fires, and lithium battery training I've been involved with pretty heavily for the last couple of years. So upping my game on that. I'm no absolute expert in fire, but I am an economist by education. So the value and the performance and the economics of wildfire fighting and the results is certainly where I come from. So visionary leadership, I think I'm a ideas person, but I'm not one to sit and just pontificate. I'm a doer. I get it. I just drove to Northern Ontario to Kapuskasing and back last week, and we're doing this event, bringing stakeholders together. One of my specialties is really about strategic partnerships and bringing different groups together, and that's what I'm wanting to do as my sort of legacy on this initiative, is to how do we save a lot of money and spend it more wisely, and at the same time reduce wildfire risk and threat. So the need for action is now. And why now? Well, the continuing use of traditional strategies is not changing and improving our results. So we need to think about how we can do better, and getting many different stakeholder groups from 3 different levels of government, First Nations, mining, transportation, insurance and banking, and all players in the well, not all players, but many players across Canada, to bring their expertise to the table. And the answer, the question I have is the how might we? But the need for systemic improvements. I mean, how do we get the different silos that operate currently to work better together? And it may only be 20% better, but 20% better could result in 50% savings if we get to fires faster, sooner. So this whole idea of moving more proactive, preventative, and early response is really what it's about. And working better together, I think, is probably one of the biggest things. The trend line is for hotter, drier summers onward. We talked Manitoba before we started here. They had the worst wildfire season in a long, long time, but they weren't on the map on this until last year. So predictive analysis as well as getting to fire sooner, faster is key here. The trend lines are up. You look at this graph on the left. That's from IBC, well, it's Climate Institute, but I think it was from the Canadian Bureau of Insurance. The trend line is up. Not every year is it's not a straight line. We are seeing an ever increasing number of fires, and the severity is going up as well. We do believe that it can be reversed. We can't stop fires from starting necessarily. But we can certainly have a goal of getting to them 20-30% faster, which will save big on evacuation and rebuilding costs as well. We see that it's a bigger issue as a proportion because Canada has lost more forest every year than any other country in the world. In my mind, we should be taking a leadership position because it's a big problem for us. Others will help. And if we look at the world, the UN General Assembly has been adding some governance and initiatives around preparedness and response and recovery to disasters. And one of the main disasters is wildfire, of course. Flood and wind damage is another one. But what our focus is, and they're focusing also on, so we should be part of that and take a leadership position on that. In Europe, we're also seeing the European Commission has announced some big initiatives to increase the number of planes, helicopters, and a more proactive approach with I might say this is reactive, but at the same time, spending a lot of money on this at the European Commission level. And again, we should be part of that discussion, and we should also take a leadership position on that. So now is the time to move forward. I read about this article that was just recently posted in the Alberta Views, which is a newspaper in Alberta. And when I read it, I reached out to Deputy Chief of Banff, Brian Casey. He has some great points. Certainly, it's not a question of if there'll be a major fire in that area. It's sort of inevitable, but we need to take more proactive approach. And you'll see our goal is not to create fear, but to turn awareness into action. And every action that's done to prevent and protect things in advance will help in the future. So we have Deputy Chief here. Brian, are you there? I'd like to have you to chime in on what your thoughts are on this article, how it might affect an initiative across Canada, and why it's important that we try to mitigate wildfire damage and the proactiveness of prevention, as well as the early response. Welcome.
90 minutes later, and they said, "Don't bother." They said it's sort of over, and I said, "Well, what do you mean?" They said it's encroached upon. We're abandoning. So they had to evacuate, of course, and their forces were marshaled, focusing on their own protection and that. And so every experience I've ever had with wildland firefighters and the WUI, like the wildland urban interface, as you're so familiar with, is the time that we think we have, even though we're being very careful about it, we usually run out of it very fast. Structural firefighters have become a bit more of a hybrid. So we're learning how the actual handle wildland and not just structural, and learning that those sort of divisions are not useful. And you're right, like we can't depend upon firefighters or better fire bombers or better technology to solve these problems. So they have to do with, I know this is unpopular to say, climate change. They have to do with the way that our environment, like how we've decided to build things, the economic the necessity of having these sort of things protected. And so it's a huge, huge, complex, wicked problem. And thank you so much for being able to speak about this today, because I know Banff, that cover, the Alberta Views, it's sort of a political magazine that sort of spans from about 10 till 2 in terms of the politics of Alberta, which tend to be kind of skewed, sometimes a little one way. But this one, it was actually fairly refreshing to see something on the cover about that was so frank. And it is frightening. And I think part of the problem is when we scare people, we can get immediate action, which we have. And that's not because we wanted to scare people, but people are scared about what happened in Jasper, especially a couple of years ago. And we moved to fire smarting, which is really great. And people are moving on that, but it's too slow. And we probably need to do a lot more. And these mitigation efforts probably need to be a lot more sophisticated, and they need to be a lot more coordinated. And so they've done tremendous work, the parks, in terms of like cutting back at least 500 meters around the town, which is really great. And but at the same time, it's a huge, persistent problem, and it's one that has huge economic and, of course, life risk attached to it. And so I'm looking forward to taking on that challenge, because the one pose on the cover is, it's not if, it's when. And they said, is Banff ready for this? And so, and what they mean by ready is a very different thing than perhaps what other people mean, because when we talk about ready, we mean, are we going to be able to save people, protect the built environment as best as possible? Are we going to have the best possible outcome, rather than, are we going to be able to stop the fire, or are we going to be able to stop it within the town? And so these are fascinating things. I'm glad to be part of your group and sit here. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to it.
Well, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. The perspective that I think is definitely different than everybody in this room, from insurance to I myself, I've been involved in the wildfire space from a technology that detects wildfire from AI cameras. I've stopped a couple of bonfires in my life, but I always say that I'm not the firefighter in the room. But certainly your perspectives are going to be great, and hopefully you can chime in as we move forward here. So the structure of what we're doing here is we're creating a Canadian not-for-profit member-based association that enables stakeholder groups to communicate and collaborate and meet on a regular basis. I think online as well as it face-to-face is going to be important. Certainly problem solving and improving performances across Canada. So the purpose and mission is to bring stakeholder groups together to reduce risk and improve prevention, preparedness, and recovery. Cross-sector of collaboration. We want all industries and communities, from Indigenous to all levels of government, to be involved. Actionable solutions. There's a lot of innovative solutions that aren't really getting the time. In every winter, we think that the government and groups will look at these things seriously, and I'm not sure that's been the case, but I think things need to change, and that's why we're here. High-level strategy. So in my mind, the accelerating response times is what really gets to fires early enough. I think, as a theory, costs go up exponentially in the first 24 hours. And I think, as a rule, we tend to get to them later, as opposed to, if we can get to them, in my mind, 20 or 30% sooner, we're not having nearly as many out-of-control fires. And enhancing coordination is a big deal for us. Predicting fires, getting that before they get out of control, I mentioned. And I think fuel loads, cost effectively figuring out how to reduce fuel loads, especially around cities and assets and infrastructure. I drove up to Kaskasing last week, many hours, beautiful country, saw amazing things. I was at the mining show. By the way, there was a wildfire in south of Timmins that was caused many people coming to the Timmins mining show have to reroute themselves about an hour out of their way, because they couldn't go from Sudbury to Timmins. They had to go North Bay and up Highway 11. That was because of the first wildfire of the season. One thing I'm also seeing in that whole Highway 11 travel, was there is a lot of dead trees, spruce trees specifically, amongst the good ones, the ones that are new. And to me, those are torches, a little bit of a spark. And they're not, the other one, the second and third ones are not that far away. The ones that are healthy don't tend to catch fire, but those other ones, I'm seeing that as a risk factor. I think, as a whole high level, I've talked to many of you about this. I think we have 2.5 goals here. The reason second and third are really interrelated, but enabling us to significantly reduce the cost of wildfire and the performance of it, because we spend billions of dollars from the fighting side of things to the recovery, rebuild, the evacuation, all those pieces. It's a big number. And if we could drop that down, we would have a lot more resources every year to spend on more important things like education, health, rather than going up in smoke. So protecting our assets, I mean, talking everything from municipalities, businesses, and infrastructure. And when I say the 2.5, it's tough to put that as a thing. So a 3 is our transportation corridors. As I mentioned, that route to Timmins was shut down for a day or two last week. Those highways, especially, there's an initiative right now with the mayor of Marathon, who's also the president of NOMA, which is the Northern Ontario Municipalities Group. They're working with the Ontario government to protect that, because if Highway 7 between Sault Ste. Marie and Thunder Bay, for whatever reason, break down and we couldn't use it for a while, it would cut our country in half, basically, and there are huge economic consequences to that. What I want to also utilize on this is some tools I've been using over the years, and I want to bring them to the table. And the concept of collaborative conferences, not your average conference where you go and look at booths and sit in some classes and listen. I want to create some collaborative, engaging conferences where we have stakeholders in the room and how we move the ball down the field, basically, with these type of environments. And my training with Dale Carnegie, I think will help with that. And I also ran a training business for 15 years. So I do know a little bit about that, but there's lots of players in this world that can help facilitate those things. The Ambassador is another solution that I'm going to go into, but Ambassador is problem solving, and there's a real methodology that major corporations in this world have used in universities to actually get through real challenging problems and solve the right problems. And MindSuite is Wayne Clancy here. I'm going to speak briefly about that as well, on the concept of how do we come up with agreement and collaboration on issues. And he's been using that methodology for a good long time, large corporations, to solve real problems. So we certainly, as a high level, I'm not here to talk about, I wanted stuff to actually happen. This isn't a government-run sort of initiative. Government, I want to be at the table. This is going to move. The Ontario government, forestry industry, and emergency services, and I assume across the country, they are pushing more and more communities and businesses to have preparatory emergency preparation plans in place, and they need to show them and be checked and all that sort of stuff. I was talking to a group just south of North Bay last week, and yeah, they couldn't come to our lunch and learn because they were having their planning session that day with all their firefighters, their emergency services, and paramedics all in the same room. So it's something that's going on. I think it can be better, and there needs to be more education available for those groups to move the ball, help them move the ball down the field. One thing I'd like to figure out over the summer, and with people's help, with volunteer help me with this, is what is the cost to society, Canadian society specifically, of wildfire, from the health costs, which are not necessarily dollar, but also the actual dollar amounts. So we've got tourism effects, and you're going to hear from Annika, who's going to be on next here. She's going to talk about what happened in Manitoba last year, which was not your normal year, but she's going to talk about that and how catastrophic Manitoba was last year. We're going to go straight to Annika.
Hi, Tom. My name is Anika Ramkisoon. I'm a communications and stakeholder strategist based here in Winnipeg. And I've been working with Tom here in Winnipeg to build a conversation locally around wildfire mitigation here in Manitoba. And Tom was kind enough to ask me to share a little bit with you today about a snapshot of what the 2025 wildfire season here was like and what it cost the province, not just in dollars, but also in community impact, especially to our First Nations communities here, with our infrastructure, and then again on the toll, disproportionate toll on our First Nations communities. I think, if we're going to talk about why mitigation matters, we need to understand what we're measuring it against. So I think, Tom, if you can flip over to slide 3, that'd be great. So, yeah, that's the one. So Manitoba's 2025 wildfire season was the costliest on record, not the largest on record. There were wildfires in the late 80s that burned more hectares, but in terms of cost, it cost the province at least $500 million. And so, when you look at the population of Manitoba, that's a lot. So, take a moment to take in that number. Our provincial emergency spending alone was $375 million, which is 7 times our annual emergency budget. And sort of to put that into perspective, it exceeded the combined operation budgets of our Environment Department and our Department of Natural Resources by over 40%. So when we look at what budget we would need to prevent this type of these skyrocketing costs, the wildfire suppression budget has been under 14 million here since 2022, and the new mitigation funding that was announced for 2026 is well under $5 million. That's something in the area of 2.2 million. So the province spent 375 million responding to a crisis, and we're only investing 2.2 million to prevent the next one. So that ratio alone tells you everything about where the province is right now and why starting and having these conversations about mitigation are so important, especially here. I think the biggest cost that we saw here in Manitoba was a cost to our First Nation communities. Behind every dollar figure here is a human cost, and that cost is considerably disproportionate on those communities. 42% of the wildfire evacuations in Canada involve First Nations people. They represent 5% of the population. That gap isn't a new gap, but the fires here last year made that incredibly impossible to ignore. The toll on communities, on families, on children was very, very difficult. We had more than 17,000 First Nations people evacuated within Manitoba. Many had to be moved from their communities to urban centers for weeks, some of them for months. They're separated from their families, from their communities, from their places of culture. And that creates a lot of chaos for them. And the things that they lose as a community are beyond infrastructure. They lost harvesting areas, they lost medicine gathering sites, and Indigenous leaders here within the province have been clear that these cultural and the other losses, they're not just environmental ones. It's not just a community. It's not just the houses that burn. They've worked very hard to build their communities to where they are, and these wildfires come in and sweep through, and within a period of a short time, it's gone. So Chief David Manias, who's one of the chiefs in Pimicikamak, which is one of the communities here within Winnipeg, called the provincial response a failure for First Nations communities here. And our, at the time, acting Grand Chief for one of our larger Indigenous organizations said the fires revealed the wide gaps in the northern infrastructure and the evacuation response. And so I think when you look at that all together, if we're going to be serious about mitigation, the Indigenous communities and leadership have to be at the center of this work. And I think here within Manitoba, it's very early to say, but with beginning conversations that Thomas had and a little bit of legwork that I've started doing, I think there is appetite here to have those conversations. And so I think that's the question that we're trying to answer. What can we do? We know here within Manitoba what the response costs. We know the budget to prevent it, and we know what we're investigating. But there's no single government, the provincial government here, a single sector here. No one community can solve this alone. And so I think the 2025 season affected a lot more sectors than a lot of people think about it. It affected mining, it affected forestry, tourism, healthcare. It affected infrastructure with Manitoba Hydro. Manitoba Hydro sustained close to $50 million of damage with infrastructure. You combine all that together, that's 2.4% of Manitoba's GDP. So it is significant. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's important for organizations like the Wildfire Mitigation Alliance to exist, to bring these sectors and communities in the same room to have these conversations, because the cost of continuing to respond without investment in mitigation and prevention is not sustainable, especially with wildfires beginning to get worse. They're getting bigger. And there are a lot of resources that can help us, especially in our Indigenous communities with fire stewards and the knowledge that they have. So I think the question, unfortunately, is not whether it will happen again. It's going to happen again. But I think the larger question we need to focus on is, are we going to be ready? And I believe that's what these conversations are about today, is starting that in the areas where there's opportunity to help prevent future fire and cost to both the province and its people. We've had some very torrential weather, I would say, in the last 3 weeks. We've had tornadoes here. We've had hot spells. We've had dry spells. It's been a very, very strange year weather-wise. But we have yet to see what, like you said, what the rest of the summer is going to be like. And we've already had wildfires here. We've already had evacuations. We've had flooding in Swan River. So the weather continues to be something that is concerning to communities and government here.
And you mentioned that 2.4% of GDP. I've been reading that as an economist, putting my economist hat on, 1% is bad for any economy. And that's sort of the normal percentage that once a fire happens. 2.4 sounds horrific based on the numbers I've been reading. That's obviously was a major effect on the province.
I think that's when you put it all together, and you put it in business terms, I think that's what starts helping these conversations move forward, because people think about the cost of wildfires, I think in smaller snapshots. But when you put it together, I mean, our CEO of Manitoba tourism sector, was involved in a lot of these conversations last year. The cost to the tourism sector wasn't anywhere near as much as it was, say, to hydro. It was in the hundreds of thousands. But still, things like the smoke affected people that were coming here long before the fires started, long after the fires were put out. So things like smoke and smog and the health effect to, again, everybody else. So that 2.4% of GDP for a small province is significant. And tourism is huge here. We have the polar bears in Churchill. We have a lot of festivals and things in the summer that people come to the province to see. So I think it's significant. And if the province keeps moving in the direction it keeps moving into, that number could grow the next time something happens. So I think here it's important for us to get our colleagues around the table and start talking about how we invest in this properly, so that we're prepared.
I was wondering, since the Indigenous community has been aware of what's been ongoing in North America for thousands and thousands of years, if there was a way that we could, again, educate people that could use their traditional practices to mitigate future forest fires, would that be possible?
I mean, I think it would be. I think that goes to speaking to the partnerships of having Indigenous communities in each province that are willing to step forward to have those conversations and talk about how that helps with mitigation. I'm not sure if that's, part of what Tom eventually sees as his vision for the organization, but I definitely think it's a huge part of it. And having government being willing to work with, people at the table that have that type of knowledge, because it can definitely help bring down the cost. I have no doubt.
Part and parcel to they need some technology, they need some resources, and they have some ways and knowledge that, absolutely having them in the room is going to be key.
Quick question, Annika. The government funding effectively remaining unchanged. Have you seen any changes from the private sector in terms of their response from the fires from last year and how they're approaching this year any differently, or are they kind of stuck in limbo as well?
You know what? I don't have a good handle on the private sector. I'd be happy to take a look into it and get back to you on that, if that would be okay. I'd prefer to give you proper information. I know I have spoken with a few people in the private sector who want to know how they can help more. And because these conversations are very new and wildfire mitigation and management hasn't really been a huge focus here in Manitoba, even from the conservation level, a lot of those conversations are very, very new. So I think you'd have to almost be privy to some of those conversations or part of those organizations to know what's going on. But I definitely know there are some larger companies who, do things like fire prevention, fire testing up in the northern communities. And I was at a gathering last year, and a lot of them were affected by some of the areas that were burned, childhood cottage areas and so on and so forth. And they really wanted to know, their biggest question was, how can we help? How can we help? So I think in answer to your question, I think if this conversation starts going the way we want to see it go, I think private sector would step in if they knew the impact that they could have, if that helps
Oh, thanks, Annika. Municipal conferences. I went to FOMA. I went to NOMA. There's an interest. There's definitely wanting to do better, and they're asking how. And unfortunately, the resources are not that accessible. There's a dollar issue, and there's also the where to get the information. But I'm getting the sense that there's a real interest and hunger for this information to improve things. That's why I after my travels north, I feel better about what we have here and what we're thinking about and how we can move the things forward. Okay, so Monty from CN Rail, where are you today?
Well, I'm in Vancouver. The discussion is very interesting.
Well, maybe talk to some of the costs and the challenges you've had with wildfire, because obviously there's lots of rail that goes through all across Canada that you need to be worried about and concerned about. And I mean, as I say, I just drove to Kapuskasing from here, and there's railroad all the way up in parallel with Highway 11. So I call those the corridors. So there's risk there to communities, to businesses, to tourism, to you name it. If you could comment on the work you guys do at CN and maybe even outside of CN.
Sure. I guess within CN, we're trying to do a lot of things. First off, was the creation of my position 2 years ago, because they recognize that, CN needs to be more engaged and to be more tied to the wildfire space. We do a good job dealing with dangerous goods and shipment issues and such. We want to do a better job as how fire integrates within the railway. And this is fires that maybe originate on the right of way or approach the right of way. In terms of costs, it's a huge cost to us. Like if you go online, you can look at Alberta. Government published some information that the Jasper wildfire that happened cost the economy of Alberta $50 million a day when the rail was shut down. And that's the kind of cost we face. Like not only does it cost we're a private publicly traded company, but it costs us, revenue and lost revenue and delays and staffing costs when we have to stop for a wildfire. But those impacts trickle on into the whole economy. And that's North American wide, because we'll move goods from, Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Montreal, all the way across Canada and down to the US and vice versa. So when we start getting delays like that, it causes a big issue. I do agree a lot of the engagement needs to increase. Some of the questions or comments made on education, it's always something we're trying to improve upon. And our engagement with, all the communities, our Indigenous communities, like we consider them partners, so we're trying to do more there. Managing wildfire risks, like from years ago, one of the problems we face is the way legislation is written in a lot of provinces. The railway ends up being financially responsible for any fire that occurs, and we've tried to do some controlled burns and manage that, and they've either gotten away or something's happened, and we face the cost of that fire, even though it wasn't something we initiated or were in control of, because the legislation is almost presumptive, where the railway ends up paying the cost of the fire no matter what. So in terms of mitigating fire and using controlled burns and even some ceremonial burning on Indigenous lands, anything that's close to the railway, we've stopped that. And I think that's put up a barrier, but until we can kind of work through on either a case-by-case basis or a provincial basis to open that up a bit, we're kind of between a rock and a hard place. For us, we do a lot of, we try and manage our vegetation. We do a lot of herbicide spraying to try and, control that. But it's a double-edged sword, because when we have dead vegetation in the early spring, those are fine fuels that are all cured and ready to burn. So that becomes a fire hazard. And at the same time, we need the vegetation in our ballast to hold the rocks together. Otherwise, the weight of the trains will push that down and push it out of the way. We've done a lot the last few years. We've created 3 fire trains to come in and to support local operations if there was a fire. These are we come with about 90,000 gallons of water with some turrets, like some monitor turrets and fire pumps that we can spray from the right of way. And we're also looking at other detection and other type of awareness for our crews that are working in the right of way to make sure that they're as safe as possible, right up to upgrading and improving our wildfire training and awareness to our people, and doing a better job of risk assessments, because we do end up having to do high risk work during extreme and very high temperatures where we can't reschedule that work. A lot of the time we try and do that, but sometimes we can't. We've made some big improvements in the last few years. We do rail grinding, which is much like, if you will, sharpening a skate. The smoother the rail is, the less risk we have for derailments and other issues. Plus, it allows our scanners to go through and inspect the rail and look for defects, cracks, and stuff to prevent a derailment long before it occurs. So if we go through and grind off the top of the rail and keep it nice and smooth, our sensors work better. So it ends up benefiting us from a safety point of view, plus a cost of maintenance point of view. And then with the grinding crew, because it is, create a lot of sparks, we've added extra, we're using a lot of drones for our fire watch and our post patrol work that we do. We have 3 water tenders on site, and this year in some areas when the temperatures warrant it, when we have to get there, we've got a 4-person initial attack crew working with us that also happens to be an Indigenous owned company. So not only are we safer, we got resources on site right away, plus we're also being able to enact parts of our Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan that we've put together.
Okay, great. Well, that's it's been just amazing content that we're doing, and I think the beauty of where we're coming from is that in the fall, when we get together for a collaboration conference, I think there's a lot to leverage off here. Okay, so anyways, next steps, I'd just like you guys to know, I think our goal here is sort of, as the board, we're going to come up with a founding members sort of package, let's call it. We're going to organize at least 2 conferences in the fall in Toronto and somewhere in BC in January. I'm looking for people that would like to be involved in specialized different types of committee work. That is about how do we do research and how do we do the what ifs and help move the ball so that we have really productive conferences. We need people that can know how to organize conferences, obviously. And we're obviously, the idea of partnership and sponsorship for these events and funding is where we're going. Not asking for anything specific today, but the ball is starting to roll on the team and anyone that's interested in getting involved in some shape or form. Please let me know. And so the ask is join a committee. Let's talk to stakeholder groups, and this event will be recorded and shareable. We're looking for 2 or 3 more board members and founding event sponsors. We're looking. That sort of wraps up where I wanted to go today. I want to thank Faskins for hosting this event and great snacks and food, and myself, Tom Hockett. You see this. This is a painting. So Tom Hockett, the host, but also the painter. As of January, I started painting things, and this was my first wildfire painting that I created. It's here in the room for those online. It may go up for auction at some point, but it's an asset of the association at the moment. Well, thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to hearing from you your thoughts on this event. And thank you. Well done.